I talk a lot about morality here and why it's important to be moral in a world that, for the most part, is going to hell in a handbasket. And to be honest, I still believe that. I strongly believe that, and as time goes on, I believe it more and more. The problem is that I haven't addressed one of the things that, how do I say? I understand why people fail at it. Why people fail at being moral, because a lot of times morality is just it doesn't seem convenient, it doesn't seem to act moral and all those things, like we give into fear. I mean, really, there's only two emotions. There's, and I'll say them in German, you can probably figure them out: liebe und Angst. And a lot of people give into Angst, which means fear, instead of acting with liebe. And a lot of times, what ends up happening is that ends up costing us, or it ends up turning our reactions into something despicable. So, I mean, even before the lockdowns, and even before all of this stuff happened, it just seemed to intensify with the lockdowns. One of the things I kept seeing a lot of, particularly here in the West, where I'm in my neck of the woods, and really most Western countries, is you started seeing a lot of distrust. You started seeing a lot of like people assuming the worst of people. I mean, you see it on the internet all the time, but to a certain extent, it spilled over in real life. I mean, sometimes you would walk down the street and you didn't even know whether to be friendly or not, because if you cocked your head at somebody, people would either ignore you or they just would give you this kind of like, oh, don't look at me kind of look. And I was just thinking, like, well, that's incredibly rude. And a lot of times it does feel like, okay, that person's being a POS. It's easy to hate them, which is a form of fear. But the thing is that the more I thought about it and the more I see how etiquette and how a lot of these other things that are we take for granted and we don't really teach them to people are incredibly important, the more I begin to realize that what's that called? It's really people acting out of fear, and it's really people not knowing better. And a lot of times fear comes from not knowing. So human nature is pretty predictable no matter where you are, whether it be in the West or whether it be in the East or whatever. Human nature is human nature, and we tend to act out of like two emotions. When we know what's going on, a lot of times we have the choice of either acting out of fear or we have the choice of acting out of love. And the thing is that, you know, how do I say this? If we know human nature, once you understand human nature somewhat, one of the things you're going to see is that a lot of people don't really know how to be social, especially the younger generation. I mean, this really started with the Gen Xers, but it intensified with the millennials, and it's really bad with the Zoomers. And it's because they don't know, because the majority of the time we get our values from the people around us, and they get their values from like television, pop culture, maybe the people around them. I mean, if you're very, very lucky and you grew up in a very moral family, your values might be something pretty good. But even if you're very, very moral, if you fall in with the wrong influence when you don't know any better, a lot of times you might end up adopting the values of those people. I mean, I know in my case, I grew up in a neighborhood with a lot of really low moral, low morality, I guess you could say low moral fiber, people with low moral fiber. And a lot of times they basically, I mean, the whole views are the views that we see nowadays in pop culture, where like, oh, in order to be masculine, you need to be chasing and sleeping around all the time, and you need to be drinking a lot of alcohol and blah blah blah, and all those really pathetic things that unfortunately a lot of young men, and to a certain extent increasingly young women, are starting to actually believe. But masculinity is not about getting laid. It's not about, you know, chasing women, and it's not about how many people you've bedded, which 90% of the time is an exaggeration. It's either an exaggeration, it's either a John, or they're very low quality people that nobody else wants to touch. And it's not about that. It's about being honorable. And morality is really something that both femininity and masculinity benefit from. And it's something that's inherent to both, what do you call it, to both people. But you see this a lot with young women, particularly. You see a lot of women don't want to go above and beyond because they just don't feel that it's a feminine thing. Although I think it's a shield, and again, it's giving into the spirit of fear. Like I've heard women that say, well, we've seen this like back in the days. I remember in like Tinder, like I remember watching a video of people talking about Tinder, and they were saying that like, oh well, There's a lot of women that go on Tinder and they basically say like, "Oh, well, you have to talk to me because I'm not gonna do it," which I find kind of interesting because it's like, well, that's pretty selfish. I mean, why are you expecting somebody else to do something that you could do? And then they would try to hide behind femininity and say that it's like, well, it's because I'm a girl. Girls aren't supposed to do that, and because evolution, blah 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 blah. Yeah, that's all horse. That's a bunch of horse manure. Evolution does not make any sense if men were the only ones that were doing the chasing, because then that would mean that rape would be absolutely natural. And I would assume that most people would think that the R word is not natural. It's something that happens, but it doesn't mean that it's natural or that it's moral and that it's good. And that probably demonetized my video, but like I care. Anyways, the point is this. Um, I think a lot of people don't really actually know about how to actually talk to people, how to be friendly. And to a certain extent, let's be honest, it's kind of awkward being friendly because sometimes we tend to feel that being friendly and nice is going to get us made fun of, or is that it's going to get us laughed at. I mean, that definitely was the case where I grew up, where sometimes you'd be friendly with somebody and they would just look at you kind of weird, like you're growing a third eye. And it's like, well, it's kind of rude. You're being friendly, and this person just basically looks at you, gives you a dirty look. And I'm not talking about like the kind of friendly where you're trying to flirt with somebody. That's not what I mean. I mean like literally, you would tell somebody like, oh, like just being friendly out of being friendly, just like, oh, you look nice, and they would just look at you kind of like, okay. Some people probably say like, what kind of neighborhood did you grow up in? Trust me, a very trashy one. Anyways, the point is this. Um, I think that's spread even more nowadays, where we don't know, like like especially with the whole, with the events that happened in the past few years or the past year, and it's made people distrust each other even more and fear each other even more, despite the fact that you know even the media has admitted that the whole thing has been kind of a big bonkers situation. And the thing is that I used to get angry at these people, and I still kind of somewhat have to. I really have to stop myself and think, because it is difficult for me. Like when I'm walking down the streets and suddenly somebody like walks to the other side of the street and treats me like I got like leprosy or something. It's like, well, that's unbelievably hilariously rude. It's not like I was trying to do anything to you. And the thing is that it's hard for me to not like hate these people. I understand that. I understand how people would see that as rude, but at the same time, I also kind of see it nowadays more as I feel bad for these people because they're giving in to fear. They are literally making themselves look bad, and they're gonna screw themselves out of like good situations eventually because you give in to fear. It's like that one line from the movie The 13th Warrior: "Fear profits man nothing," and you have to fight it. Now I know there are some people that are gonna say, well, it's because of the whole safety standards and everything like that. I don't want to get into that right now because honestly, that is a whole, that's a whole rabbit hole mess that really it just becomes a debate where if somebody believes something, they're going to believe it, and they're not going to stop believing it because, well, they're dumb, and that itself is a symptom of fear or whatever. The bottom line is this: what's it called? You can say whatever you want, but it's still giving into fear. You know, in a way, like that fear and that etiquette is one of the things that even I feel like it led to my moral failing in certain situations, which now I look at differently. As I said before, it is difficult to be moral in a world where everybody else is, not even taking it into consideration, or very few people are taking it into consideration. Sorry, my eyes are kind of dry, and I got something in my eye right now. It's bugging me, but whatever. Anyways, the point is this: um, that morality is important, as I've said before, especially when the world is not following it, because you're not going to change it for the better. You're not going to affect it for the better if you yourself aren't doing the things that need to be done to make it better. Like you can complain all you want and moan all you want about how there's no trees being planted out in the world, but if you're not out there planting them yourself, well, then what good is it? You're basically just bitching. And the thing is, I take that to heart, and I've taken it even more to heart as time goes by, because when I was traveling abroad and everything like that, there were quite a few situations that I ran into where looking back at them, I feel like I failed morally. Like I could have done better. Now, some people would say, well, what is it that, what are those? Well, I mean, I guess I haven't explained them yet, but the thing is, there was one situation particularly that I really want to bring up. And that is, well, it happened more than once, but let me just bring up one situation for now. There was this one time when I went to a hostel in a certain country. I'm not gonna not going to get into specifics because I want to respect people's privacy. But geez, somebody's playing music outside right now. Anyways, the point is this. Um, I ended up basically running into this one young lady. I'll briefly describe her. She was of Central European descent, I think, and she had, what do you call it? She had very light colored hair, very light colored skin, very light colored eyes. Very pretty girl in very good shape. Very attractive young lady, and she took an interest in me. And you know, like obviously she was very pretty, and I kind of somewhat took an interest in her, but I didn't really talk to her much. The thing is, there was this other gentleman there, very tall, good-looking guy, and he took an interest in her. And the thing is, it was obvious that like when we all went to the bar. Nowadays, I wouldn't even go to a bar. I wouldn't even touch bars. But the thing is that we went to the bar. She tried talking to me, and the gentleman, the taller gentleman, he was sitting in between us, between me and the girl, and we were trying to talk, and suddenly I could tell that this guy was bothered by the fact that she was talking to me because it was clear that he was interested in her. And this is funny because I understand that mentality, I understand that jealousy, and I understand that like that envy. That like, oh well, I want that girl because she's pretty and everything like that. But the thing is that this gentleman didn't understand that you can't make women like you. You can't negotiate and you can't convince somebody to like you any more than a girl could convince him to like her. And you would think like the natural thing for most guys out there and most people out there would be like, well, why didn't you take the girl with you and go someplace private so you could talk to her and tell that guy to go eat a juicy wiener schnitzel? Well, yeah, it's easy to basically think that. It's easy to assume like, oh well, what do you call it? Yeah, that would have been the natural thing to do. But no, that would have helped out nobody because I later on found out that the young lady, even though she was very pretty, she wasn't very moral. The thing is that what I should have done and what I really kind of regret not doing is I should have told the young lady that the gentleman here has an interest in you and you need to address it, but make sure that you tell him like, that if you make sure that when you tell him if you're not interested in him, be nice about it. Do not tell him, "Oh, I'm not into you, dude, so piss off." Don't do that. Be nice, but do let him know the truth. And that would have benefited both her and that would have benefited both him because if the girl would have just straight up just told him like, look, dude, it's not gonna happen, but I do, I hope that you do find who you want. And at the same time, the guy would have heard it straight from her mouth. He would have probably backed off. I mean, unless he was incredibly pathetic and he chose not to, in which case I would have had to tell him like, dude, you really need to learn your lesson. But the thing is that it's a moral failing on my part because I allowed myself to, or I didn't allow, but I didn't take that part. I guess you could say I omitted it. And when I mean, I later on got a chance to talk to this guy, and he tried to tell me like, oh, that girl totally sucked my. Well, I'm not gonna get into it, but the thing is that it was clear that what he was trying to tell me wasn't really so much that he had sexual relations with this young lady, but rather what he was saying to me was like, I want her for me, and I know she likes you, but I want you to give her up so that I get her and that I can come in and swoop her off her feet, which is pathetic, but it's understandable. He was letting his passions control his mind. And I feel like I failed on my part for not addressing it. Now, the young lady herself wasn't exactly very moral either, like I remember that like because I didn't come on to her and because I didn't chase after her, she what's it called? She took it personal. She took it very personal actually. And what ended up happening is that like I remember I was sitting down in the lobby of the hostel reading a book and all of a sudden she's coming down there and she as soon as she sees me sitting there, she turns on her heels almost immediately. She doesn't even walk through the hallway and immediately goes and starts talking to these two Australian guys in kind of a friendly tone. Now I knew, and she did it loud enough for me to hear. Now, some people would say, "Oh, how do you know she was doing that for you?" Trust me, I've had this happen to me a million times before, where a girl tries to make me feel jealous because I didn't chase after her, because I didn't simp for her, because I didn't come on to her, which is funny because most of these girls refuse to be honest with me. But whatever. And it's a very despicable thing to be honest. And yeah, I used to get really, really angry, and I used to just say, "Well, f these girls, screw them. They deserve whatever misery they get." And it's hard for me to not feel that way nowadays. It's hard for me to like overcome that, but it is important that I do because I understand what it is. It's the same thing that happened to the gentleman when you think about it. Both of them are giving in to their passions, and both of them are acting on fear. And this wasn't the only time it happened. There was another situation that happened in another country with these two gentlemen both of them Westerners, who, what's it called, were interested in this one young lady who was a local of the country who was very, very attractive. And she obviously wasn't really interested in either of these guys, but these guys wouldn't stop simping. And I just kind of felt like, geez, I kind of feel like I need to tell both of these guys, hey, you need to be honest with this girl about how you feel, but you also need to accept her decision. And I wish I would have told the young lady, like, hey, you need to address these guys because they're not going to stop. They're going to keep simping until, until they think one of them thinks they would think that they've won, or until you tell them to go, until you tell them, like, hey, it ain't happening, dudes. But I would have encouraged all of them to be friendly and to be understanding because the thing is, nobody likes to be told to screw off, and people are less likely to listen to something if they're not friendly. And this is where I'm saying, like, I feel like I failed morally there, and like this isn't the only time. There's been many, many situations out there where, where I felt like I could have had the opportunity to tell people to be more honest. And even if things didn't work out between me and like, and this young lady, or even if these guys told me like, oh, whatever, man, we're not friends anymore, not that we ever were, because most backpackers are not your friends. I'll make a video about that later on. The thing is that, what's it called? It would have helped them out a lot more because even if they didn't take my words to heart, my words would have still been there. And it would have told them like, dude, if you want to connect with people, and if you want to not be, if you want people to not, how do I say this? If you want to connect with good people and you want people to connect with you, you need to be honest and straightforward. You can't try to manipulate them. You can't try to play games. You can't do this idiotic, like, oh, you got to use game. Game is a myth, guys. You can't game anything. And the same thing with girls, like you can't manipulate a guy to, what's it called, do anything. Like if the guy is indeed high quality, he's not going to want to put up with you. He's going to walk away and say, well, I don't need these mind games and these headaches. I've done it, and I mean, like, I'm not saying that I'm high quality, but there are definitely guys out there that are very high quality who have done it. And the thing is that both of these people are going to keep, they're like Wile E. Coyote. They keep making a trap that they fall into, but rather than like learning from their mistakes and reevaluating, they just keep doing it over and over again. It's pretty sad when you really think about it, and that's why I tell you, it's when I really think about it, I actually feel bad for these people because I understand, or not because I understand, but because I know that these people are, slaves to their passion, they're slaves to their emotions, they're pathetic in the sense of the word, and they will never get the good because they don't want to become the good, or maybe because they don't know any better. And I feel like I could have done better, and I failed on my part by not telling them these things because I myself was blinded. I mean, I wasn't chasing after any of these people, but I was blinded by my inability to know what to do because I didn't have a time to evaluate it. And I guess, in a sense, that's why I'm thankful for these lockdowns or these other things that happened over the past year because it gave me the ability to look at these things differently. And it made me understand that if you want people to be better, you need to be better. And the only way you're going to do that is by being honest and straightforward and nice about it. Because that's the only way people are going to get the message.